Hello out there in podcast land. Welcome to the Game or Die podcast. The website is gameordie.net, and you can find me on Twitter at themadman007. I am your host, Ryan Moore. All right, today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the Castlevania series more. For whatever reason, that series has got its hooks in me. Like, it is unbelievable. I've played so many Castlevania games over the last month or so. I started out with Symphony of the Night, and then for whatever reason, I kind of played it in reverse order. I played Symphony of the Night, and then I went to Rondo of Blood, and then I went to Bloodlines, and then I went to Super Castlevania 4, then Castlevania Chronicles, and then I played it in regular order. I went to Castlevania 1, 2, and 3 on the NES. I don't know why. It's just something weird. Whatever reason, I was like, I want to play something. I don't go back and play a lot of NES games unless I have a reverence for them or something, or it's something that I really, really want to get into. And that's why I kind of played it in a different order for whatever reason. But I've been really, really digging this series. It's got a lot of issues, which I'll talk about, but Symphony of the Night hooked me, man, hard. And I know those games are very different. Symphony kind of created that Metroidvania series where it's a lot of open-ended world, going back and forth, exploring all this stuff, seeing the same stuff over and over again, a lot of backtracking. And the original games are a lot more linear, which I liked. I liked that a lot more than the exploratory stuff because I'm not a fan of backtracking, like I said in the previous episode. So I never really got into those games as a kid because, again, it was a more horror aspect to it. I was never a big Frankenstein fan or a Dracula fan or Creature from the Black Lagoon. The only monster movies that I was really into as a kid was Godzilla. I don't know why. I loved the idea of Godzilla, big gigantic monster attacking the city. So that was my type of monster movie, was Godzilla. But as the years progressed, I started enjoying the classic Universal monster movies a lot more. All the black and white stuff, the stuff from Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney and things like that, Phantom of the Opera. But that was all later in life. You know, I was in my 20s when I started really enjoying that stuff. When I was just first married, my wife was really trying to get me into Frankenstein and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because pop culture has kind of made me wary of Frankenstein. You know, he's a big dumb monster. Oh, fire, bad. And that's about it. That's pretty much all that anyone knows about Frankenstein's monster is that, A, it's Frankenstein's monster. It's not Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the doctor. But Frankenstein's monster is largely regarded as an idiot, like this bumbling monster character that has no feelings or empathy or emotion or any of that type of stuff. But when my wife got me starting to listen to the audiobook of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it changed my mind on Universal monsters and made me realize that there's a lot more depth to those characters than there really are in pop culture. Because when you read that book, you notice and you realize that the monster actually has a lot of feelings. He can talk and have conversations. He has emotions that say, you know what, I hate that I'm back alive and I'm angry. People hate me for it. And it's really interesting. So I started gaining a little bit more, I guess, respect for those characters and things like that. And so coming to the Castlevania series now with having that added knowledge, it makes it a lot more enjoyable. even though the lore of Dracula in these games are not really that big, they don't go into a lot of depth or detail. It just kind of happens, and you kind of piece together that stuff from maybe half a paragraph, in the beginning of the game before you start. So I'm going to kind of talk about those games in chronological order of playing them now, because there's just no reason to not do that. So I'm going to talk about the first game, the NES version of Castlevania. When I played this game years ago, when I was setting up modded Xboxes and things like that back in the early 2000s, emulators were like the major reason why people wanted modded Xboxes. So I put together all these things, and I would always test the games out with, or the systems out with games that I knew how they played and things like that. And one of the games that always popped up, and I think I talked about this in the last episode, was Castlevania for the NES this time. And I would always, test out a few games because I know how they played. Castlevania, Mario, Tetris, just a couple games that I know how they played, how they sounded, how they looked, how they felt. So playing Castlevania, I played through probably the first 2 or 3 minutes of Castlevania NES dozens of times. And it always baffled me that the hearts were not health. And I always thought there was something wrong with the game itself. So I would always try and download a new version and go, hey, I need to play these games for this, and I need to set everything up properly. And I can't do that with corrupted ROMs. So I would download a new ROM or two, and it would mess me up because I would get hit, and then I'd grab a heart and nothing would happen on the life meter. And I just didn't know how these games played. So years later, I started understanding, the hearts are actually special attacks, and, health is only gained by hidden wall roast beef and things like that. And it's ridiculous. So I never really played it, but I went through and played it again for this, I guess, series or whatever I want to call it. And I really enjoyed it. I liked being able to just play the game normally as a regular platformer, going through a linear mode. I'm not choosing it. Like, it's just a game, and it was kind of refreshing, especially after a Symphony of the Night and things like that, where it was like, choose this or choose that, and do this and do that. And it is a nice breath of fresh air to go back to a linear story mode in a game where you just progress, you go to the end of the level and you get to the next one, and you go and go and go until you finish. So that was really nice. Not really a whole lot. It's kind of a difficult game, but all you have to do is really, learn the enemy attack patterns and things like that. So not really a whole lot to talk about for the original Castlevania on NES. Then I went to Simon's Quest, Castlevania 2, and holy crap, this game is so different. It's basically just like Zelda 1 to Zelda 2. It's a very different game and has a lot of similarities to Zelda 2, where it is kind of open world. You are side-scrolling and going through, and you arrive at these towns, and you can go wherever you want, whenever you want, stay as long as you want, talk to people, and have conversations. It's really cool, but because this is an old NES game, and it was made in Japan, and the translation is so bad and awful, a lot of the things get lost in that translation. A lot of intricacies about the game, a lot of things that you need to know. You would never know unless you looked at a guide, and that's the issue I have with this game. I actually hated this game for the several hours that I was playing it until I kind of finished it up. And then I thought back on it, and I was like, wow, you know what? It did a lot of really interesting and cool things. is just, unless you're watching someone play or look at a guide, there's no way to beat this game at all. And I believe there was, it was such an obtuse game for most people that Nintendo Power actually put out a guide in their magazine when the game came out because it was just impossible to play otherwise. So basically, there's a lot of items that you need to get, and you get these through hearts. And this time they change hearts up into a currency as well. So you're using your attacks, your like secondary attacks, the axe and the dagger and all this stuff. But you're also using those hearts as currency. So you kill enemies, you get hearts, and then you have to go buy stuff with those hearts. So you have to save up a lot, and there's a lot of just grinding, which I hate in games. And this is why I hated the game at the outset, because it was just grinding. I needed a white crystal, and so I needed 50 hearts, so I needed to go grind out 50 hearts. And then I buy the crystal, and then I need to go buy a new whip because my old whip is, bad and not doing enough damage. And I got to go get 250 hearts for that. So I have to go grind for a while and try and not die and try and not continue, because if you continue, you lose all your currency. You lose all your hearts. So it just became this repetitious, really boring, listen to a podcast and grind out the hearts for a while, depending on what I was doing. There's also, in the towns, all the stuff that the game tells you about is so obscure. You have no idea what they're talking about. Again, unless you read the manual or a guide or something like that. And even the manual doesn't really help all that much. How do you regain health? Well, you have to go to a church. But the game tells you stand in front of the church and yell. There's no yell button or anything like that. And if you just stand in front of the church, nothing happens. You have to go inside, talk to someone, and they'll just refill your life meter, which is not really that difficult because you try that probably first before standing in front of the church and just kind of waiting or pushing buttons or something. But there's a lot of other stuff. Like, the only way to progress and get to the dungeons or the mansions that the game calls them is there's certain random things that you have to do that you would never know, and the game doesn't really tell you about either. Like, you have to exchange your crystals for this stuff. And so you go to talk to people in the village, and you first have a white crystal, and then you have some guy says, I'll exchange this crystal for the blue crystal. And so you get the blue crystal, and then you're walking around, you get to the edge of a lake. And if what you have to do is, equip the proper crystal. First of all, you have to have the proper crystal. I didn't know that because this guy was like, I'll exchange it for you. And I was like, no, I want to keep my white crystal. And so I walked around, went to the lake, nothing happened. Equipped the crystal, nothing happened. Went back, exchanged it for the blue crystal. Went back to the lake, nothing happened. Equipped the blue crystal, nothing happened. And then, so you basically have to have the proper crystal, get to the lake, equip it, and then you have to kneel. So you just crouch down, and you have to just stay there for like 5 seconds. And then the camera starts panning down, and apparently the water lowers or whatever. This is a 8-bit side-scrolling game, so animations are terrible. You would never know that, but you just kind of glean it from, what's happening on screen. So the water lowers down, and then you progress through the game. And then you get to another part where you have to have another crystal, a red crystal. So you have to exchange the white one for a blue one, the blue one for a red one. Go to this area that's super far away, that has a lot of difficult platforming, that has these floating bricks that go up and down. And the gaps are way too... they're way too spread out so that your normal jump doesn't work. So you just die over and over and over again, and then you get to continue and blah, blah, blah. But the game doesn't tell you this. If you jump at the proper height of where the block is going up and down, you get a super jump. And this is the only time the game does this, is when you're on these blocks and you get a super jump, so that you can jump across to the next block, because again, like I said, the gaps are way too large. And it's just like, come on, how is anyone supposed to know that unless they just try over and over and over again? And if you're failing over and doing the same thing over and over again, nothing is changing, you stop doing it, right? That's the way a human thinks. So you wouldn't think that doing it over and over and over again until it just magically works sometimes is good. So that's ridiculous. Then you get to this dead end, basically. You equip the red crystal, and then you kneel in just a corner area, and you wait, and like 5 to 7 seconds later, a tornado appears and whisks you away to the area. Or you have to have a certain item equipped for the ferryman to take you and just randomly transport you to a different area. It's mind-boggling how ridiculous some of this stuff is for this game. You would never know to do this unless you looked up a guide. That's not the way I want to play games. I don't want to have to sit there and read what I need to do next. I just want to do it and figure it out. If I get stuck, sure, I'll look up maybe a strategy or something like that, but I'm not going to follow a guide, because why even play the game at that point if I'm just reading what happens and then doing it? So, kind of ridiculous. But like I said, Simon's Quest does do some really fun and interesting things. It's just the way that they got there. It's a lot of just poor execution. And like I said, it's mostly because of those bad translations. Those bad translations just make the game so much harder and more difficult and harder to understand, but it does a lot of really fun things. And I really did enjoy my time with that game once I learned, I just need to read what to do next. And instead of trying to bang my head against the wall for hours on end, trying to figure it out, going back and forth, trying to equip certain weapons, kneeling in just random spots, because that's what you do in these games. And there's a lot of other random stuff that you have no idea what to do. Like, there's garlic that you buy. You buy this garlic, and it's a one-time use item, and you can only buy X amount of it. So you buy this garlic, and if you don't have it in the certain area, nothing happens. But if you do have it, and you randomly drop it in like a graveyard in a specific spot, a character appears and then gives you something special, like a silver dagger or a red dagger or whatever. And it's just like, why would someone make most of these things so impossible to know, unless this is literally the only game you play and you have all the time in the world and you've dumped 700 hours into it? Yeah, I'm sure you would figure it out eventually, but especially nowadays, there's way too many games to play to spend more than several hours on a NES platformer. There's no reason for it. So, Simon's Quest, good game, bad execution, which is a bummer because I really liked it, especially after playing Dracula's Curse, the third Castlevania game. Oh my gosh, I was so excited once I finished Simon's Quest, I was like, I'm excited to play the another linear story platformer, because Simon's Quest was so different. It was exciting to go back to that formula. So going back to the linear story, it's a side-scrolling platformer again. But man, this game is just so weird in so many different ways. It has, the graphics for me is a complete downgrade in every aspect. From the first level, it looks like a glitch. It looks like a bad ROM hack. It looks like there's something wrong with the cartridge. And I started playing this, I'm like, what's going on? Same thing with the heart thing, I thought the game was messed up. I see what they were trying to do. They just did it in a very poor way, where they're trying to add backgrounds and things like this to make it look better. But when they do that, they use these weird patterns that don't mesh together well and don't look like anything. It just looks like garbled mess of graphics. So the graphics look glitched, and, I spent some time trying to figure out, where am I supposed to go? I missed so many stairs that I needed to go to because they just kind of blended into the weird graphics. I missed so many jumps and died so many times because I thought it was a platform, but it was just the background. It's a mess of a game. It looks awful. What was cool about it was that this time they switched it up so that there's branching paths. So you get to kind of choose where you want to go, and you can miss very large chunks of the game because you went up instead of down, or you went left instead of right. It's cool, and there's a couple bosses that you fight that allow you to select different characters, and this I now understand why the Bloodstained Curse of the Moon game had this, where you actually get secondary characters that you can hit the select button and kind of switch out and switch to that character, and they have different and unique abilities. That's super cool, but I very, very, very rarely ever used them. I went to the clock tower at the very beginning of this game, and you fight this hunchback, and you find out he was turned into this weird monster or whatever, and his name's Grant Dynasty, for whatever stupid reason. It's a terrible name. And he can climb walls, and he says he's very fast, but for me, I didn't notice any speed difference, and I never needed to climb any walls, so I literally never used him. I selected him once, and then I was like, this is kind of pointless. His attack sucks and all this stuff, so I switched back to Trevor Belmont and played through the rest of the game. There's multiple different characters. There's Grant Dynasty, the Hunchback. There's Alucard, which I'm assuming that I guess this was kind of the first time that they talked about Alucard and showed him. He's really cool, but his sprite's larger and he has a really good attack, but I didn't really notice any difference between him and Trevor. So again, I played through the game mostly as Trevor. I very rarely ever switch to Alucard, and apparently he can change into a bat, but like I said, every time I played as Alucard, I never got those abilities, so I never saw his special. So again, why would I play as this character when his attack usually isn't as good sometimes as Trevor's? That whip is just, a key weapon in these games. So I switched back to Trevor and played through the rest of the game. There's a couple other characters that I didn't get because of the branching paths. You just straight up skip several characters in the game that you'll never see unless there's a multiple playthrough. And man, I wish I would have loved this game to play through it multiple times, but this game is so infuriating. It's one of my least favorite games in the series. The reason is, because of the graphics. The graphics are so garbled together and meshed up and look ugly that you can't see what you're doing unless you die to it and remember it. And that's one of the biggest things with this game, is that it's trial and error. It is the reason why I hate the Dark Souls games. It is, you just have to mess up so many times that you just burn it into your brain. All right, I need to stand here and stop, wait, and then inch forward to where the enemy spawns. And then I need to back up a certain amount because I need to know the attack pattern, because the enemy placements are perfectly placed to kill you at every single moment. So one level can take you several hours if you don't memorize it properly. That's part of the issue. The other part is that there is a timer as well, which screwed me over so many times to where I would, practice all right, just stop here, wait for this character, be very careful, back up a little bit, play it safe, kind of. But you can't. with this game because the timer is so perfectly placed and these levels are so long that by the time you get to the boss, you have about 30 seconds, usually. Sometimes there was about a minute, maybe a minute and a half if I was lucky. If I used save states and kind of not cheated my way through, but saved my way through the game as I perfectly progressed through it, which literally, like, I would spend like half an hour or 45 minutes on the level, and I was just like, screw this. This isn't fun. This is not a good way to make a game, is to just trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. And like I said, the enemies are so perfectly placed that you think you're doing good? Nope, because the enemies move up and down and left or right in a certain pattern to where if you back up, they're going to jump towards you at the perfect pixel count. And so I got so angry at this game because I was like, dude, I'm doing everything perfectly and I'm still dying. And even then, I'm doing everything perfectly to the point that even if I do it, I get to the boss's attacks aren't that hard. The bosses actually are the easiest thing in the entire game, I think, for the most part. There's a couple that suck. But the way that I got there, I did everything perfectly, and then I barely have any time. So I need to just get hit because I cannot take the time to calm down, regroup, and figure out the enemy attack pattern. And then you usually have half life or whatever because you're getting screwed over throughout the entire level. There's very rarely any health upgrades or health restore points or whatever you want to call it. Health chickens, wall turkeys, wall roast beefs. So you don't have the time to actually, make a game plan in your mind. You just have to go for it. And most of the time, if you just go for it, the way the game is programmed is it's going to kill you every single time without fail. So either you use save states and kind of get your way through the game, doing a perfect run and then loading when you die, and then memorizing and carefully placing every single step meticulously and perfectly timed too. Because you cannot wait. You cannot take your time on this game. And then the music. The music sucks. The music is such a downgrade in every single aspect of this game. There's a point near the end of the game where it's just this weird like almost like kind of like this Mario castle theme, but it has no rhythm to it, and it is just grating and annoying. This game sucks. It's a terrible game. Dracula's Curse is a bad Castlevania game. It's not even a bad Castlevania game. It's a bad game. If they would have just tweaked the timer, I would have had a million less issues with it. If they would have just allowed me to take my time and really watch my step through the game without having to worry about rushing through it, the game basically pushes you. Every single time your character is on the screen, the game is pushing you towards the end goal, which is not that big of a deal. But when the enemy placement is so perfectly paced that the game pushes you directly into those enemies every single time without fail, and you have no time to react or no time to be cautious, that's bad game design. So I was super pissed off when I played Dracula's Curse. Castlevania 3 on the NES sucks. So now we come to Super Castlevania 4, which was a real fun game. I really liked this game. Better graphics, better music, and the attacks in this game. I played this game back in 2007, I want to say, 6, 7, somewhere around there. First time I played this game was on the Wii, on the Virtual Console. I remember this is back when it was still brand new. Virtual Console, they're releasing old games on the Wii. And so I bought a couple of them. I bought the Toe Jam and Earl series. I bought Super Castlevania and maybe one or two other games because they were cheap and, I was working and single at the time. So I had all the money to buy all these dumb ROMs for the Wii. And it was more for the fact that people wanted to play them. So, people would come over and I would play those games with them. And so I'd just buy whatever. Anytime someone wanted to play, Toe Jam and Earl 2, even though that game sucks, I bought it because I wanted to play it with people and I didn't want to bust out a modded Xbox or, hook it up or whatever at the time. I was more lazy than cautious with my money. So when I played this game for the first time, I got maybe a couple levels in. It was fine, but man, again, such a breath of fresh air for the series. It just looks so cool. It's got really cool Mode 7 graphics, but unfortunately, those really cool things that the Super Nintendo game does are barely in it. There are 2 levels in Super Castlevania 4 that use Mode 7. There's one where it's this rotating, corridor. So you're on, you're platforming, and the background is kind of rotating in the Mode 7 graphics way, and it looks rad. But that's the only time that ever shows up, and that level's a good minute, maybe a minute and a half long, depending on your play style. If you just run and gun, or you're a little bit more careful, but it's not hard. I don't think I even took damage on that level because you just kind of go through it. You're more going, oh man, look at the background more than anything else. There's another part where you get to this one room in one level where you have to hang on a sconce or a hook on the wall, and you're hanging on it with your whip, and the room rotates around so that the ceiling is now the floor or the wall and stuff like that. And it does it twice, and so you kind of have to wait for the walls to rotate around. But again, once you kind of play through that section and know what's going on, that level is about 45 seconds long. And that's it. That's all the Mode 7 that you get in that entire game. And it just is like, man, come on. Why would you not make more of this stuff? Maybe it was, at the time, it was just hard to learn how to code and program this stuff. So maybe they were pressed for time. I don't know, but it's barely a talking point. I've talked more about these 2 levels than it takes to play through them. So Mode 7, kind of a bummer, kind of a letdown. The other part is that the levels are just kind of there. They don't really do a whole lot. They're a lot of the same stuff, and this is my biggest issue with the entire series, is that if you play through one Castlevania, you've played through most of them. They all feature the same levels. They all feature the same enemies. They all feature the same bosses. They all feature the same bosses with the same attack patterns. You've played through one, you've played through most of the series, and it sucks that it's that way. That's why I liked actually Symphony of the Night's Inverted Castle, even though it was boring to backtrack through upside down version. They added new enemies. And that's what I don't want to say it's a lazy design, but man, it seems like it at some points, because it's like, dude, I know these, get different enemy types. You don't need to use skeletons. You don't need to use axe knights. You don't need to use Medusa heads with the same movements, the same patterns of movement, attack patterns, all this stuff. It's just the same thing over and over again. What I did like about Super Castlevania 4 is it added some new stuff. There's a whole level where you're in this money bin, this money room, almost like Scrooge McDuck's money bin, where you're just in this cavern that is full of treasure. And there's a part where the money, I guess it's money falling or something like that, but it kind of obscures the screen a little bit, and it looks weird, and it's a bad effect. Even for the time, I think it was a bad effect. And the graphics don't look amazing. These aren't amazing Super Nintendo graphics. It's something that's a little bit different because the game itself was a new release, apparently. I don't know exactly. I think it was near around the launch window of the system. Excuse me. So the game itself doesn't look absolutely amazing, and maybe that's why Mode 7 wasn't integrated completely into the game, which is a bummer because, man, shoot, I think it would have done a lot better if they gave it a little bit more time and not had to rush it out, apparently. But it doesn't look great. But like I said, the soundtrack is really good. The graphics are fine. I thought it was going to look a little bit better because of my memory. I thought it looked fantastic, when I first played it in 2007-ish. But coming back to it now in 2019, it's a little rough around the edges, but nothing too bad. It's a launch Super Nintendo game. Obviously, the games on Super Nintendo that were allowed to breathe and have a little bit more artistic style and stuff like that look a lot better, but it's fine. What's also really cool about Castlevania 4 or Super Castlevania 4 is that the weird chain, the chain whip is such a weird thing in this game and I don't think it happens in any other version or any other game in the series, but you have this weird chain whip that has physics on it. Loose physics. And basically you can whip and you can just tap the button, or you can hold the attack button. Your whip goes out and then it just kind of dangles and goes limp. And it's weird. And so you can waggle it around and just hold the button down, hold the attack button down, and then go left, right, circle, up, down, in a circular pattern or whatever. And you can kind of just waggle it around like a loose lasso or something like that. And you can actually attack and damage enemies. It doesn't do as much damage, obviously, because you're kind of just like, but it's still weird and funny to do, and it's unique. Also, what's really cool is you can use the whip to actually hang on and swing across hooks and things like that in the various levels, which is really cool. And that's what you need to do in one of in that rotating room. Where you need to hang on the hook. You actually use your whip to hang, like Indiana Jones, basically. And you can go up and down. You can actually lower or raise yourself on the whip, which obviously doesn't make any sense if there's no animation to it. You just kind of go up and down, but you get the idea. And it's cool. It's a fun little game. It's nothing to write home about because, like I said, it's Castlevania. If you played that game or you played a Castlevania game, you've seen most of the levels in this game. You've seen most of the enemies. You fight a giant bat at the beginning. You fight a Frankenstein monster. You fight Medusa. You fight all these enemies that you've fought in all the other games. So then we come to, what else? I think Rondo of Blood is the next one in the chronological order. And this game is fantastic. It's probably my favorite in the series that I played up to this point because, again, it's a breath of fresh air for the series. You're playing as Richter Belmont, and the graphics on the TurboGrafx 16 or the Turbo Duo or PC Engine, because it's technically a Japanese game. It was never released in the States. It's not released for the TurboGrafx CD. It's a CD game. So with TurboGrafx, there's the American version, which is called TurboGrafx, the NEC TurboGrafx 16. And then there was a CD attachment, the TurboGrafx CD. In Japan, that system is called PC Engine. Why? I have no idea. I think it's a dumb name and it's super confusing. Kind of like how the NES is called the Nintendo Entertainment System here in America, but in Japan it's called the Famicom. So it's kind of the same thing. So the Japanese version of the TurboGrafx is called the PC Engine. Rondo of Blood is a Japanese-only game, and it is a PC Engine CD game. But through the magic of emulation and fan translations, I can play the translated version of this on the PC Engine CD, or you can download it, or you were able to download it on the Wii Virtual Console. They released that, but it was the non-translated version. So I got a translated version. I've actually patched the game ROM myself so that it has English subtitles, because what's really cool about this game is that there is different enemies or not different enemies. There's multiple characters that you can play through as well, and you unlock them, and it's just a fun game. So, or a fun time doing all that stuff. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but the music is just, it's so good. The graphics are really well done. The gameplay is super fun. Everything about Rondo of Blood is fantastic. It is the best version of Castlevania to play. And what's really cool too is because the way Rondo is made and Symphony of the Night, they actually combined and they interstitched the story. And that's why Symphony of the... Is it Symphony of the Night? Yeah, in Symphony of the Night, you start off the game at the end of Rondo of Blood. You play as Richter Belmont for the first few seconds, and you start fighting Dracula. You fight Dracula, you kill him, and then Symphony of the Night technically begins. So you kind of should and have to play this game if you are a fan of the series or if you really like the lore, because it's the story. Of fighting Dracula, and there's, like I said, there's Maria, who's a playable character who is like this little girl that throws doves and cats and all this weird crap in the game and does a lot of stuff so that you can get to areas that Richter never would be able to. So there's multiple playthroughs through the game, which are again, a cool thing. It's just I'm not going to do that. I've played through most of the game. I've seen most of the stuff. So... after Rondo, then there's Castlevania Bloodlines. Bloodlines. This was a Sega Genesis game that technically takes place after Rondo of Blood, I believe. And you play as two random characters. John Morris, who looks like a football quarterback, USA #1 guy, and some other guy, I think his name's like Eric Lamont or something like that, and like some weird like Mayan warrior-looking guy with a long spear. So you get to choose your character, but they barely play differently. One has a little bit longer reach, but less power. The guy with the spear has a longer reach, but does less damage to enemies. So I opted to play as John Morris, some guy who does something. Bloodline sucks. It's a bad game. It looks bad, especially coming from Rondo of Blood. This game was a year after Rondo came out, so it should look theoretically better. Since the TurboGrafx 16 or CD was, even though the audio is obviously going to be nowhere near as good because of CD audio versus Genesis audio, Bloodlines just sucks. It's very unimaginative, but they do add some new enemies. They do add new areas and levels and stuff like that, but it's not even worth talking about. It's just kind of a crappy game altogether. So Bloodlines is kind of the last one, but I did actually play one other game in the series, which was Castlevania Chronicles. Because I was playing Symphony of the Night, I was like, oh, hey, what other Castlevania games are on the PlayStation? Well, there's only one other one. It's called Castlevania Chronicles. And this is a port of the Sharp X 8600, which was a Japanese-only computer from the 80s. No one had it in the States. No one knows what this system is. And it's actually, I've played around with it. It's not a good system. It is an old 80s computer. So there was a Castlevania game made for it. And it is a remake of the original NES Castlevania with way better graphics. Actually, I think it came out around the same time or whatever, but I don't know the story of all the different ports and versions of Castlevania. I don't care that much because, like I said, all of them are the same exact anyways. I think most of the games in the series are basically a remake of the first one because you're seeing the same enemies and same levels. But the graphics are so good in this. The music is phenomenal in this game. I think this is the definitive Castlevania game to play. If you like Castlevania, or if you've never played Castlevania, and you're like, man, I don't want to get into all these different games. I don't have the time for it. I've heard people say it's kind of a lot of the same similar stuff, or you're listening to me talk about it. Play Castlevania Chronicles. It is the best way to play one Castlevania game. If you want to play the older linear style of gameplay, that's not a Metroidvania, that's not exploratory, that's not coming around and searching and backtracking and all this stuff, this is the best game to play in the entire series. The graphics are phenomenal. The little added things that they did with the 32-bit PlayStation system, they add lightning, they add these trees and movements and stuff like that. Even the level design, they basically take and just expand on it. There's a level where near the end of the game where you fight Death. Again, another enemy that you see in almost every single game, or boss that you see in every single game. You fight Death. And in this level, there's pictures. And in the NES, it's just a picture frame with a black background, and there's no pictures in it for whatever reason. I guess they couldn't draw it properly, or maybe it just they weren't able to use the proper color palette because of the limited color palette, whatever. But in this version, there's these beautiful pixelated drawings and things like that that have a lot of good color depth to them. It is so cool. There's one that the picture actually shatters and parts of it fall. And it's so unique. It's everything different about that series that needs to be different, but still stay the same as a remake of the first game. Like I said, the audio is so good. It's rocking. It's jamming. You're just like, oh man, this is so cool. This is perfect, like fighting music. It gets you amped up and pumped to go kill a bunch of monsters. It is phenomenal. If there is one game to play in the series, if you go, man, I like the sound of Castlevania, but I don't know if I want to go through all the tooth and nail fighting to learn enemy attack patterns of the original NES series. I don't want to mess around with exploring and having obtuse puzzle elements that I have no idea unless I have to look up a guide. I want to have something that looks really nice to play and looks cool and sounds good. And it's just a fun game. Castlevania Chronicles on the original PlayStation is the perfect Castlevania game. So, that brings me to now. I've played through Castlevania 1, Castlevania 2, and Castlevania 3 on the NES. I played through Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo. I played through Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine CD. I played through Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis. I've played through Castlevania Chronicles on the PlayStation, and then I've also played through Symphony of the Night on PlayStation as well. So, Castlevania 1, 2, 3, 4, Rondo, Bloodlines, Chronicles, and Symphony of the Night. I've played through 8 Castlevania games in the last month, roughly. I don't know where I go from here. I was thinking about playing Dark Souls, but then I went, shoot, I still have Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1 and 2 on PC to play. And I'm about, I think the timer is at 2 hours on my Steam account for Lords of Shadow 1. And I know the twist ending and all that fun stuff, unfortunately, so there's no surprise there for that game. But I think I'm going to play that, but I might take a break. I'm not sure, depending on work and my schedule and things like that. Because I might need a little bit of breath of fresh air. I wanted to try and play Dark Souls again, just kind of see, since I have this better mentality of those games, and there's a very Castlevania quality to that series of Dark Souls and Bloodborne. I don't own Bloodborne, but it's super cheap on PS4. I might play that. I'm not sure. But I think I need just a little bit of a palate cleanser, maybe. But that is my obsession for the last month, is the Castlevania series. And quickly, before I finish up, I want to talk about the Netflix series. I remember watching this when it came out, and it was very short, unfortunately. Season 1 is I think 4 episodes long. And it is ridiculously violent. It's it's an anime, so I was like, I don't like that style, but it's Castlevania. It's a video game series. It's on Netflix. I have a Netflix account. Why not just watch it? So I went and watched it, and it's really, really good. It's super cool, but it's very gory and violent, to the point where it's like that violence where you don't want to look at it because it's so gross. But I really enjoyed it. And then when season 2 came out, I started watching it. I got through the first episode, started getting into the second episode, and I just never finished it up. So this week, while I was in a hotel for work, I went, you know what? I just finished all these Castlevania games. I'm going to watch Castlevania. And so I just started season 2 over again because I remember everything that happens in season 1. So I started season 2 over again, first episode. And this season, I think, is 8 episodes long. So it's like double what the first season is. It's really good. It's so good. It's awesome. It's so violent. But they really do dive deep into Dracula. And that's the main draw of this entire series for me, is Dracula. And you spend so little time getting story out of these games, which is a bummer. That's, I think, the biggest flaw out of all the series, is that the whole premise is fighting Dracula, and various reasons why. You're this vampire hunter, bloodline, where you are the Belmont clan. You depending on which character and what era you're in. Trevor, Richter, Simon. But you're the Belmonts, and they are a breed of vampire hunters. They are, cursed apparently to fight Dracula for all eternity or whatever. And there's no actual reasoning or story for this in most of the games. Symphony actually I think Rondo actually kind of really goes into it a little bit more, and so does Symphony, but those are kind of the tail end of the stuff that I've been playing. So everything else is like literally a paragraph, if that, about why you're fighting Dracula or who he is and what's happening, what's going on, the lore, the story behind everything. So watching the series on Netflix and really getting a deep background and learning about all the different other characters that are there that actually do some of them appear in like Castlevania 3, Sypha, and a couple of other characters. They're in, and even Trevor, they're in that series. They're like some of the main characters in that series for Netflix. So like the Netflix series is basically kind of Castlevania 3 in anime form, which is kind of a bummer because that's the worst of all the games. But they do expand on the characters. They really make you care about them, understand their reasoning behind what they're doing and things like that. And it's fantastic. It's violent. They do a lot of stuff that you see in the games. They kind of take little tiny aspects of the games, and they're not like huge, like wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge, like, hey, look at our video game reference. It's like, hey, here's a little thing that we took from the games and this apparent lore that's in those games. And they expand on everything, and they make it interesting to watch and understand and listen to. It's phenomenal. If you like Castlevania, if you can stand the very, very violent imagery that happens on this stuff, if you like horror movies and things like that or shows, you'll really dig Castlevania on Netflix. So that is me talking about Castlevania, the series so far. I might jump into other games. I might not. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But whatever it is, you can be sure that I will be talking about it on the next episode. So until then, thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you next time.